October 1942, General Motors Inland Division, Dayton, Ohio. George Hyde, a 52-year-old German immigrant, looked at specs that seemed impossible. The Thompson submachine gun, America's famous weapon of war, cost $200 per unit, over 10,000 $10,000 in today's money. More than 4 months' pay for a typical GI. With millions of soldiers heading to 2 places, the math was harsh. At this price, America couldn't afford to arm its own army. Colonel Rene Studler's assignment was clear, but tough. Design a submachine gun that works like a Thompson but costs 90% less 7 months. That's all Hyde had before American forces would attack Sicily, and Italy needing weapons that factories couldn't build fast enough. Hyde's first model looked good until he showed it at Aberdeen. Proving ground. It looks like something that fell off the assembly line at a Buick plant. One ordnance officer sneered, "Where is the craft? Where is the woodstock?" The Army had asked for cheap, but they still wanted it to look like a real gun. What they got instead would be called the ugliest weapon in American history. But in the mud of Italy and the frozen hell of Korea, soldiers would learn a big truth about the link between beauty and survival. The morning of October 15, 1942, found George Hyde bent over his drawing table in the bright-lit engineering bay of General Motors Inland Division in Dayton, Ohio. At 52, the German-born immigrant had spent 2 decades designing firearms, but nothing had prepared him for the manila folder that Colonel Rene Studler had put before him 3 days earlier. The specs read like a math impossible wrapped in bureau language. The Thompson M1902-8A1 submachine gun, the weapon that had come to mean American firepower from Chicago streets to Guadalcanals. Beaches had a price that made Pentagon accountants worse, $200 per unit in 1939. Hyde had done the calculations again, hoping his pencil had slipped somewhere $10,500 in modern buying power. More than 4 months of base pay for a private first class. The simple M1 Thompson rushed into making after Pearl Harbor still cost $70, hardly a better deal when seen against the size of World War. The arithmetic was hard. America needed to arm millions of men for together battles in Europe and the Pacific. At $200 each, equipping just 1 million soldiers would cost $200 million, nearly 10% of the whole defense budget before you add ammo training and moving supplies. The Treasury made its position clear. The Thompson was pricing itself. Out of American arsenals, Studler's job burned in Hyde's mind like a challenge to the laws of physics. Design a submachine gun that works like a Thompson but costs 90% less. All-metal build 45 caliber ACP ammo under 500 rounds per minute. Cyclic. Rate 90% accuracy at 50 yards, which means 9 out of 10 shots must land somewhere inside a 6 by 6 foot target. Most important, the gun had to be made with car factory methods and with very little machining, a rule that made old gun makers laugh and car engineers nervous. The time was even worse than the specs. 7 months. Hyde had exactly 30 weeks before American troops would need huge numbers of submachine guns for the planned invasions of Sicily and Italy. Intelligence said German and Italian defenders were getting ready with strong positions that would need close fighting. Every day, American factories failed to make enough cheap submachine guns was one more day GIs might face enemy positions armed with costly weapons that existed more on paper in buying offices than in soldiers' hands. Hyde's first idea was to use his team's fresh experience with odd production. General Motors Inland Division had just finished one of the war year's boldest factory jobs, making 1 million single-shot Liberator pistols for European resistance fighters. The crude but working pistols were built fully from stamped metal parts, using car press tools and spot welding. If they could mass-make pistols like car parts, maybe. The same rules could work for submachine guns. The first prototype, called the T-15, came off Hyde's drawing board as a big break from normal gun building. Where the Thompson used finely cut steel and polished walnut, the T-15 used stamped and welded steel sheets made into a useful but plain package, a sliding wire stock stretched from 29.8 inches to 22.8 inches. The receiver looked like two car fender pieces welded together, and that is what it really was. Early tests at GM's range looked good. The T-15 shot straight, cycled well, and could be taken apart for cleaning in under 30 seconds. Most important, the first cost estimate said it could be made for under $25, a unit exactly the 90% cut that Staler had ordered. Hyde let himself feel a small bit of hope as he got ready for the formal show at Aberdeen Proving Ground. The drive to Aberdeen in November carried the full weight of American factory power. Hyde knew his test gun meant more than saving money. It stood for a deep question about what kind of army America wanted. Would the army choose bold new ideas and efficiency, or would old habits force weapons to look like classic guns, no matter the cost? The answer came fast and harsh. The Aberdeen officers handled the T-15 with hidden dislike, their faces moving from interest to boredom to clear rejection. "It looks like something that fell off a Buick plant line," said Major William Harrison, Aberdeen's main small arms tester. "Where is the craft? Where is the woodstock? This looks more like a garage tool than a war weapon." The bias ran deeper than looks. For years, the American Army had linked good weapons with fine handwork, carved wood, shiny steel, smooth finishes. The Thompson's famous look, with its drum magazine and neat details, had become part of American war pride. Officers who had carried Thompsons in World War I felt that Hyde's stamped metal design was an insult to Army pride. Hyde watched his months of effort tossed aside in minutes of careless handling. The Army had asked for low-cost making, but their reaction showed a big problem inside military buying. They wanted cheaper guns, but without changing how they looked. The T-15 met every rule for performance, but its look broke hidden beliefs about what American guns should be. The ride back to Dayton was long and cold through November night, with reports coming from North Africa about Thompsons jamming in desert sand and jungle wetness. The irony was heavy. Hyde saw that the pretty gun was already failing, while Army leaders still cared more about looks. Every day factory lines fought to make enough. Thompson's was another day. American soldiers risked battle with too few close-fight weapons. As GM's Inland Division lights came into view under Dayton streets, Hyde faced a choice that would shape his name and American small arms history. He could remake his gun to please old Army tastes, or he could give soldiers what they truly needed to live, no matter what the brass thought. The Thompson's looks was hurting it as surely as enemy fire, and Hyde held the plan for its ugly but effective replacement. Hyde returned to his drawing table with a new idea that would change American small arms doctrine. What if ugly was really better? The Aberdeen rejection had stung, but it had also made a basic truth about military buying that Hyde's engineering mind could now use. The Army's look biases were blinding them to working better. If he couldn't make his weapon look traditional, he would make it so clearly effective that appearance became unimportant. Working with Frederick Sampson, General Motors' chief engineer and master of car mass production, Hyde began a careful breakdown of everything the military thought important in submachine gun design. Sampson brought 3 decades of experience turning raw steel into strong car parts, understanding deeply that simplicity in making meant removing everything that didn't help the main work. Where traditional gun makers saw craft, Thompson saw waste. The new model, called T-20, came from their work as an even more radical break from military rules. Hyde removed every part that was only for look-keeping, only parts that directly improved battlefield effectiveness. The result looked plain by traditional standards, but showed a masterpiece of working engineering that would soon earn the nickname that defined its legacy. The grease gun, after the common car tool it looked like. The receiver design showed Hyde's change in thinking. Instead of cutting a solid steel block, the Thompson's approach that needed skilled machinists and expensive equipment. The T-20 used two pressed steel clamshells welded together along their seams. Each receiver half could be stamped from sheet steel in seconds, using existing car press tools. The welding process perfected. For car body construction, made joints stronger than traditional methods, while removing hours of careful fitting and finishing. Total making cost for the receiver assembly, $2.50 compared to $15 for the Thompson's machined equivalent. The stock was another win for function over form, where the Thompson had carefully fitted walnut that needed seasoned wood, precise machining and hand finishing. The T-20 used a telescoping wireframe that collapsed from 29.8 into 22.8. In the design, removed the need for expensive materials, while giving better portability for tank crews and paratroopers who needed small weapons in tight spaces. Manufacturing cost 30 cents per unit versus $8 for Thompson wood stocks. Hyde's most controversial. The innovation was the dust cover safety system that replaced the Thompson's complex mechanical safeties with simple elegance. Truly, flip the cover, open to fire, close it to safe. The mechanism protected the weapon's internals, while giving a foolproof action that could not be accidentally turned off under stress. Traditional ordnance officers saw this as a crude and simple change, but Hyde knew that combat effectiveness beat mechanical fancy. The bolt design showed Hyde's deep understanding of what infantry needed in battle. The T-20's heavy bolt cycled at 450 rounds per minute, compared to the Thompson's over 700 rounds per minute. Military traditionalists called this worse performance, but Hyde had read after-action reports from North Africa and the Pacific that showed an important truth. Lower cyclic rates saved ammunition and made sustained fire easier to control. American soldiers were wasting Thompson ammo because high cyclic rates made accurate fire almost impossible. The enclosed action was, perhaps, Hyde's most important innovation. Unlike the Thompson's exposed operating parts, the T-20's bolt and springs stayed fully inside the receiver. Dirt, mud, sand, and water. The constant enemies of infantry could not get into the action to cause jams. This single design choice proved decisive in places from Italian mountain passes to Pacific jungle fighting. When Aberdeen Proving Ground tested the T-20 in December 1942, the results told a clear story that beat aesthetic bias in mud tests made to copy combat. Conditions: the Thompson jammed after 50 rounds and needed field cleaning to work again. The T-20 fired 200 rounds without a single stoppage because its enclosed action kept dirt out. Sand testing showed even bigger differences. The Thompson needed cleaning every 100 rounds when run in desert tests, and this matched field reports from North Africa, where American units had weapon problems in harsh conditions. The T-20 kept firing for 500 rounds without maintenance. Its simple blowback action and the enclosed mechanism proved better than the Thompson's more complex but weaker design. Cold weather tests proved Hyde's idea right. At cold temps that copied European winter, the Thompson's many springs and complex parts began to fail as oil got thick and metal shrank. The T-20's fewer moving parts and simple mechanism kept working, and this helped it succeed later in the Battle of the Bulge. The numbers were clear. In tests across all weather, the T-20 worked 99.7% of the time, while the Thompson worked 86.3% under the same conditions. The ugly gun was not just cheaper, it was clearly more reliable when soldiers' lives depended on a weapon. On Christmas Eve 1942, the Ordnance Department officially recommended Hyde's T-20 as the United States submachine gun caliber 45 M3. The final cost figures proved every part of Hyde's bold plan: $18.36 for the gun, plus $258 for the bolt assembly. Total cost $20.94, less than half the simplified Thompson's price, while showing better reliability in every test. The recommendation meant more than saving money. It marked a big change in American military thinking, away from looks and toward practical function. Hyde's ugly gun had shown that working well, not looking good, should decide which weapon the Army used. The question was whether American soldiers would accept a gun that looked like a car tool but worked like the most reliable submachine gun in history. General Motors Guide Lamp Division in Anderson, Indiana, had spent the past decade getting perfect at making car headlights. Their factory floor moved with the exact pace of car mass production. By January 1943, that same floor was changing fast into a weapons plant. Engineers retooled assembly lines to make war gear, and the switch from lights to guns proved that American factory skill could adapt superfast when the nation's survival was at stake. The M3's design was a manufacturing revolution that proved every lesson Frederick Sampson had learned in 30 years of car production. Where the Thompson needed 21 machined parts that required skilled workers and costly precision tools, the M3 needed only 3 machined parts. Every other element could be stamped, pressed, welded, or formed using existing automotive tools and techniques. The make receiver used the same spot welding methods used for car body construction, creating joints that were stronger and more consistent than old gunsmith techniques while cutting out hours of hand-fitting and finishing. The magazine design showed the manufacturing idea perfectly. Thompson magazines needed machining-tight tolerances and skilled assembly, which made each one costly and slow to make. The M3 magazine was made from sheet metal using press tools with sizes set by the stamping dies, not by a single craftsman. The feeding lips that guide cartridges into the chamber were made during pressing, which removed the hand-filing Thompson magazines needed. Making time per magazine fell from 45 minutes to under 3 minutes. The sights showed the new thinking about mass making. Thompson sights needed machining, careful adjustment, and individual zeroing when they were put together. The M3 used simple stamped sights, drilled to final size during test firing, letting each gun be zeroed fast and well without costly fitting. The front sight was a stamped post. The rear sight was a stamped aperture, plain in look, but better in how it worked, and needing less frequent care. The production numbers from Anderson broke every idea about how to make weapons. Guide Lamp could make 1,000 M3 submachine guns per day, compared to 50 Thompsons from old gun makers. Setup time to switch from making headlights to making submachine guns took exactly 30 minutes, showing how flexible car-style tools were. Worker training time fell from 6 months for Thompson work to 2 weeks for M3 assembly, because auto workers already knew stamping, welding, and line assembly skills. Material use was another win for smart design. Each M3 needed 3.5 pounds of steel compared to 8.5 pounds for a Thompson, which mattered when America built the largest Navy Air Force and mechanized Army. The lower material use did not mean weaker build, but smart engineering that cut extra strength while keeping the needed strength. Stress tests showed The M3 stamped receiver was actually stronger than the Thompson's machined part in key spots, while weighing a lot less. The first M3 grease gun came off the Anderson line on May 7, 1943, exactly 7 months and 3 weeks from Hyde's first, and it showed U.S. factories were ready to fight. The weapon proved a proof of American factory power more than just a way to save money. Frederick Sampson watched the first gun come off the line, like an engineer who had shown car factory methods could make military gear better and much cheaper. But the factory revolution met the hard wall of military culture. When the first M3 guns arrived at training camps, in summer 1943, soldiers and officers reacted coldly. They had learned for years what a real military weapon should look like, and the M3 did not match that picture. Instead of polished wood and machined steel, they saw stamped metal and spot welds that looked crude. Staff Sergeant William Morrison at Fort Benning wrote the usual reaction. "It feels cheap in your hands. Looks like something from a garage, not an armory." The troops called it the grease gun, and it was not a compliment. The name stuck because the gun looked practical, but many troops linked quality to old-style craft. The Army leaders had the same look worries and deeper doubts about replacing an iconic gun with a mass-made substitute. Colonel James Harrison, the head of Small Arms Training, warned, "The M3 may work fine, but it does not inspire soldier confidence." Military effectiveness depends not only on how a gun works, but on the fighter's faith in their weapons. This stamped metal substitute hurt that needed faith. Critics also attacked design choices. The M3's 450 rounds per minute rate felt slow next to the Thompson's over 700, but Hyde chose the lower rate to save ammo and make fire easier to control. The wire stock seemed flimsy, though it was lighter and more compact. The simple safety looked crude, though it was more reliable. Training officers said soldiers needed extra practice to get past their first doubt about the M3 unusual design. Reports noted that troops consistently shot more accurately with the M3 due to its better control, but many said this gained to other factors rather than saying the weapon's built-in advantages. The mental barrier created by the M3's look was proving more hard to overcome than the technical problems Hyde had solved through better engineering. The Army resistance reached its peak when several senior officers formally asked that Thompson production be resumed to keep American military standards. Their arguments focused on soldier morale, weapon prestige, and the hidden factors that helped military effectiveness beyond mere mechanical function. The ugly gun that had solved America's production crisis was facing rejection by the very institution it was designed to serve, creating a crisis of confidence that threatened to hurt the entire program. Just as American forces prepared for the largest amphibious operations in military history, the M3's proof came not in the controlled environment of training camps, but in the harsh test of combat where look biases vanished under the pressure of life-and-death use. By mid-1944, American forces were finding that Hyde's ugly gun had qualities that no amount of traditional craft could copy, as battlefield conditions separated theory performance from real effectiveness with clear clarity. Tank crews were the first to use the M3's new design. Their excitement, born from close familiarity with tight fighting spaces where every inch of space mattered. The Thompsons, 32 in length with stock extended, made moving inside Sherman and Stuart tanks a constant struggle, especially when crews needed to fight infantry at close range during urban fighting. The M3's 29.88 in with stock extended gave important advantages in tight spaces, while its ability to telescope to 22.8 in made storage and fast use much easier. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes, commanding an M4 Sherman during the Italian campaign, wrote the real differences in his after-action report from the fighting around Monte Battaglia. You try swinging a Thompson around inside a tank turret when Jerry infantry gets close. The grease gun fits where the Tommy won't go. Had to fight German soldiers at point-blank range yesterday. The M3 let me get my weapon up and firing while my loader was still wrestling his Thompson into position. The weight difference proved equally important during long operations at 8. 2 lb compared to the Thompson's 10. 10 plus lb. The M3 reduced tiredness during long patrols and long engagements. Paratroopers who carried every bit of gear on their backs during combat jumps quickly saw that 2 pounds less per weapon across a full unit gave real battlefield advantages. The 82nd Airborne's official report from Operation Market Garden said that M3 armed squads could carry more ammo and medical gear that Thompson units could not handle. But the Pacific Theater gave the M3 its biggest proof, where wet, hot conditions that beat traditional weapons showed the smart design of Hyde's work. New Guinea's heavy humidity and non-stop moisture made weapons upkeep a nightmare that Thompson users struggled with. The Thompson's open action needed daily cleaning to stop rust and jamming, a hard thing to do during long jungle fights, where Japanese contact could happen anytime. Marine Corporal Anthony Ritchie wrote in his combat journal from Bougainville Day, 2 Thompson started jamming. Every few rounds humidity gets into everything out here. Picked up a grease gun from a wounded GI thing, kept firing, no matter what I threw at it. Went 3 weeks, 800 rounds, never cleaned it once. Never jammed, not even when I dropped it in a stream. During that night patrol, the closed action that officers at Aberdeen had first called crude turned out to be key in places where old designs kept failing. The M3's bolt and springs stayed fully sealed from water dirt and mud that got inside Thompson. Parts, even with cleaning field reports from Pacific battles, kept showing M3 reliability above 95%, while Thompson's dropped under 70% during long jungle fighting. The European front proved it again during the freezing winter of 1944-45, when the Battle of the Bulge tested every American weapon to its limit. Ice cold that froze Thompson's solid, left them useless, right when German troops attacked American lines. By surprise, Private First Class Michael Sullivan from the 2nd Infantry Division wrote home, December 23rd. Temperature dropped to 15 below. Jerry came at us before dawn. Johnson's Thompson froze solid. Couldn't even pull the bolt back. My grease gun kept chattering like it was summer in Georgia. That ugly gun saved our whole squad that morning. The M3's simple blowback action and fewer moving parts proved inherently superior in extreme weather conditions, where the Thompson's complex mechanism required precise tolerances that cold weather disrupted. The M3's robust construction and simplified operation continued functioning reliably. The heavy bolt that critics had characterized as sluggish actually provided superior performance in sub-zero conditions by maintaining sufficient momentum to cycle the action when lighter mechanisms failed. German intelligence reports captured during the Ardennes offensive specifically identified M3-equipped American units as priority targets, recognizing the weapon's effectiveness in close-quarters winter fighting. Wehrmacht after-action reports noted, American grease gun most dangerous in bunker-clearing operations. Simple, reliable, always functional, even in extreme cold when other weapons fail. The psychological transformation among American troops paralleled the weapon's tactical vindication. Initial skepticism gave way to grudging respect as soldiers discovered that the M3's unglamorous appearance masked superior battlefield performance. The nickname grease gun evolved from mockery to affection as troops learned to trust Hyde's revolutionary design philosophy. Technical Sergeant David Chen veteran of both Italian and French campaigns, captured the evolving sentiment in his unit history. Started calling it the grease gun as a joke. Looked like something from a garage, not an armory. But after 6 months of combat, that garage tool brought more of us home than any pretty gun ever could. Function over form, that's what keeps you alive. But just as field validation was establishing the M3's combat superiority, disaster struck the program from an unexpected direction. Quality control issues emerged in early 1945 as rapid production expansion compromised manufacturing standards that had made the weapon reliable. Some M3s suffered weak recoil springs that caused feeding problems, while others experienced bolt breakage during extended firing. Critics who had opposed the program from the beginning seized on these failures as vindication of their aesthetic and institutional prejudices. The crisis threatened to destroy everything Hyde had achieved through superior engineering and battlefield validation. Orders came down to halt M3 production and return to Thompson manufacturing. Despite the overwhelming combat evidence favoring the newer design, Hyde's revolutionary weapon faced potential cancellation just as its combat superiority was becoming undeniable, creating a bureaucratic crisis that would determine whether American small arms doctrine would embrace functional innovation or retreat into traditional thinking that prioritized appearance over effectiveness. The news that arrived at Hyde's Dayton office in February 1945 carried a devastating irony that summed up the whole M3 story. The last Thompson submachine gun had rolled off the Savage Arms production line, ending the making of America's most famous weapon not because it was outdated, but because it was too expensive to keep building. After producing 1.5 million Thompsons, the beautiful gun had priced itself out of existence, falling victim to the same cost pressures that had inspired Hyde's revolutionary design. The Thompson's end left a gap that only the M3 could fill, but new quality control issues now threatened to destroy the program just when it was needed most. Hyde and Frederick Sampson worked urgently and carefully to find and fix the production problems that critics used to attack the entire project. Their investigation showed that quick factory expansion had weakened steel standards and spring tensions, making the weapon less reliable. The solution reflected the same simple engineering ideas that had guided the M3 from the start, solving complex issues with elegant simplicity. Stronger steel solved the bolt breakage problem, and new spring designs fixed the feeding issues that had appeared in some guns. The improved M3A1, introduced in December 1944, addressed every real complaint while keeping the low cost and easy manufacturing that made it so successful. The biggest visible change was replacing the weak cocking handle with a simple finger, hole in the bolt, removing the part most likely to break in the field. A tougher rear sight improved accuracy, but still used the same automotive-style production methods. Most importantly, new strict quality checks stopped the uneven factory standards that had caused early reliability troubles. By the end of the war, the results proved Hyde completely right. Total M3 production reached 606,694 units, saving over $150 million compared to making the same number of Thompsons. The weapon's reliability hit 99.7%, even better than Hyde's highest hopes. The gun, once called ugly and unreliable, had become the most dependable submachine gun in American history. But the M3's final and greatest proof came during the Korean War, when frozen battlefields that broke other guns showed how truly strong Hyde's simple design philosophy was. The Korean War became the final and truest test of the M3's story, about function versus form, because the brutal cold erased all ideas about looks and left only pure mechanical performance. Private Bob Shine from the 2nd Infantry Division saw this firsthand during the retreat from Seoul in January 1951. His unit fought Chinese forces in freezing weather where a gun's reliability meant living or dying. "I hated that gun when they gave it to me at Fort Lewis," he said later. "It looked like junk compared to the Thompson guys carried in the movies. But when we hit those Chinese positions at Wanju, my grease gun fired every single round. The guy next to me with a Thompson jammed after 10 shots. That ugly gun brought me home." Captured Chinese reports during the Spring Offensive showed they specifically ordered attacks on American soldiers carrying M3s because the weapon was so effective in close-range combat. Their intelligence also noted that the M3 stayed reliable in weather that made other guns fail, marking M3-equipped troops as priority threats. Back in the U.S. Army, attitudes shifted the same way. What began as mockery turned into respect, as officers who once laughed at its looks came to admire its performance under real combat stress. By 1953, even the most old-fashioned officers admitted that Hyde's ugly gun was far more dependable than the beautiful Thompson it replaced. The rules Hyde had proven with his design became permanent parts of American military thinking for decades. Function matters more than form. A good enough design built right beats a perfect one built wrong, and effectiveness should always outweigh appearance. These ideas that once seemed radical became standard for how the U.S. military chose weapons large and small. George Hyde passed away in 1963 with his M3 still serving American troops, long outlasting the critics who had mocked it and the traditions that had tried to stop it. The M3 fought through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, proving again and again that real strength comes from smart engineering, not good looks. The M3's legacy went far beyond the battles it fought. It changed how Americans thought about what really makes a weapon effective. The grease gun showed that true innovation can look ugly to people used to traditional beauty. It proved that groundbreaking ideas often break old rules, and that real military strength comes from weapons that keep working when everything else fails, not the ones that just look impressive during peacetime shows. The last part of the M3's story revealed something deep about American character. The same country that once rejected Hyde's design for looking rough later accepted it because it worked every single time. The early dislike for its looks turned into respect for its smart and practical engineering. The gun, once called too ugly for American soldiers, became the most trusted submachine gun they ever carried. For the GIs who took the M3 through 3 wars, how it looked stopped mattering completely compared to how it performed. They learned that real beauty in a weapon isn't about shine or style, but about working right when lives depend on it. The grease gun's plain, practical design showed true American creativity, the kind that cuts away everything unnecessary and keeps only what counts. In the end, George Hyde's ugly little gun taught America that the most beautiful answer is the one that works when nothing else does. His idea, proven both in the workshop and on the battlefield, became a lasting rule in American military thinking. What matters most is effectiveness, not appearance. The M3 grease gun proved that sometimes the most powerful kind of innovation is building something simple enough to work perfectly every single time when it truly matters.